State Senator Cyr. That's awesome.
Thank you so much for having me. And as I said prior, my colleague David Vieira is actually the House today was debating increasing the age of use for tobacco to 21, which is a public health accomplishment, something we've been pushing for quite some time. The House took it up today, and they were debating late, and so about 6 o'clock his debate ended. So he sends his regrets. I want to join in the choir of congratulations, and actually I should say many years ago, when I was a student at Nauset Regional High School, I served as the student representative to the school committee. I did not have as lengthy or august of a tenure. I only served for a year. Usually they reserve that spot for a senior. So I have no idea how you were able to muscle out the competition of the senior when you were a freshman, sophomore, and junior. But you know, that was the first experience that I had sort of in a public position. Then I did not imagine that however many years later that I would end up the state senator for the region. But be careful what you get into. I really want to encourage your work, and service. I think we need, particularly for our communities here on Cape Cod to thrive. Right, we need folks really to participate and be involved in a really small town democracy. And so just really want to applaud that. So I have citations both from myself and then also from Rep. Vieira that he sent my way for you. And just as a little tidbit, the Massachusetts legislature is the longest continuously serving legislative body in the world. The Brits, thankfully, had a few civil wars, so we had to usurp them in time. And so this citation from me, and also the citation from Representative Vieira, this goes into the public record of the longest continuously meeting legislative body in the world for posterity. So congratulations. Be it known that the Massachusetts Senate hereby extends its congratulations to Frederick Handel III in recognition of your 4 years of dedicated service as student representative to the Mashpee School Committee. And be it known further, the Massachusetts Senate extends its best wishes for continued success, and this citation be offered, duly offered by the Senate and attested by the clerk, signed by Harriet L. Chandler, President of the Senate, William F. Welch, the clerk, and offered by myself. And we have a parallel citation from the House of Representatives offered by Robert A. DeLeo, Speaker of the House, and Representative Dave Vieira. So here are 2 more things that you can add to your wall. I want to congratulate you. Yeah, you got it. He's good. Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Before they go, I want to take a picture.
And so it's a pleasure to be with you folks tonight. And I'll do my best to represent Dave Vieira as well, though Dave is someone who I think you folks have had more experience with because he's been in his position longer. This is my first term in the legislature as a state senator for the Cape and Islands District. That encompasses 20 communities, Mashpee out to Provincetown, and then Nantucket, Martha's Vineyard. I actually happen to represent the smallest school district in the Commonwealth, which is the island of Gosnold, Cuttyhunk, which has 2 students in their school, but represent multiple school districts. And so in my first year, I felt it was really important that I made sure that I went and met with all the boards of selectmen and town councils that I have in the district. And then this year, have wanted to go before all the school committees that I represent. Yes, because so many of the things that you folks are trying to do here, the state has some involvement, or maybe I should say interference, with, and I think also that education is actually how I got my start in public service. When I was a junior at Nauset Regional High School in 2003, we actually had a pretty significant budget gap. I think it was a $1.8 million budget gap. We didn't get the 4 member towns to pass overrides. That have laid off 40 teaching positions and staff, including several teachers of mine, including my choir teacher. And so that was the first political thing I ever did. And that's how I got myself landed on the school committee then when I was a senior. But education, especially Cape education, is really important to me. So I've been following. Actually, this is my third night in Mashpee in the last 5 or 6 days. I was at the Commons. I was at the high school the other night for the town meeting. I'm with you folks. Certainly, a lot of exciting things are happening in Mashpee that the school committee and the superintendent, you and your team have been working on. Certainly excited about the renovation, the exterior renovation projects here. At the annual Red Cross Heroes Breakfast, I was proud to honor a 6th grader in the Mashpee schools, Lila Burke, and a Mashpee parent, Robert Ravello, who were recognized for saving the life of a young boy who was drowning in a pool. Certainly, you folks continue to amaze with 3 consecutive state championship football teams. So congratulations to your coach and the whole team. I'm a big fan of Project 351. Was a past volunteer for the organization, actually. Someone who I used to work for started it, Governor Deval Patrick. And I annually host the legislative breakfast with Carol and Casey and Project 351 at the State House. And so this year's breakfast is coming up. It's going to be on May 16th. And I think Skyla is here tonight, Skyla Ripple, the Mashpee 8th grader, who's the ambassador for 2018. So I hope you'll be going to Gillette Stadium on Saturday for the reunion. There's a whole reunion. They open up Gillette Stadium. And then certainly the legislative breakfast. I have obligations in the district, so Skyla, you'll have to have fun for me. But I think certainly it's a real honor to be considered an ambassador, and I think programs that enrich and encourage leadership, especially in middle school years, which I recall is such a fraught, difficult time, and I think many of us do. I think is really critically important. I'd also mention one thing that's been really important to me. I'm only as good at this job as the people who work with me in my office. And so everyone who works on my team is our Cape Codders. Jeff Soares, who's my district director from Osterville, so just close to Mashpee, is here tonight. But my newest staff person is starting on Monday, and she is a Mashpee native and resident, Lauren Gottlieb. So she'll be starting in my office as an assistant for constituent issues starting on Monday. So glad to have her on our team and making Mashpee proud. I wanted just tonight to give a little brief update on, where what's going on legislatively around education, and then just open it up and take any questions that that you folks may have. We are actually taking up tomorrow in the Senate a pretty significant piece of legislation on the Foundation Budget Review Commission. I actually have some handouts here on what we're looking to do. But essentially, we've had over many years, but I think crystallized through a bipartisan commission of experts that the legislature convened several years ago, that we have underestimated the cost of education in Massachusetts by about $1 to $2 billion a year. You folks know that, certainly in the amount of local aid and both Chapter 70 funding, other supports through the spent circuit breaker, transportation costs. This has really been a challenge. And the solution that we have been working to come up with is to really make sure that there is equal access to quality education across the state, and that we're looking at making sure that we're sort of expanding the pie of resources. I'm always, and many of us are always really hesitant if we're going to sort of redistribute the current funding formula, but if we expand that formula, and if we expand the amount of money that we have access to, we really are hopeful that this is something that will really make a difference for schools and school districts across the Commonwealth. So the bill we're taking up tomorrow implements the recommendations of this bipartisan Foundation Budget Review Commission. And it looks at several areas where we think the state needs to do more to help school districts and schools. One is in healthcare costs. That's nothing new to you folks, or probably to most anyone, right? Who, whether you're running a home and a family, or a business, or a school district, healthcare costs and the cost of healthcare continue to mount. We feel in the Foundation Budget Review Commission recommendation says we need to do more on that. We agree. Making sure that we modernize components and supports for English language learners, which is something that has sort of emerged here across the Cape is something that's in need. We need to do a better job on that. Making sure that we accurately project special education costs, and specifically with the education circuit breaker, the special ed circuit breaker, working to really increase that, to fully fund that. There's other efforts that need to be looked at as it relates to, this is less relevant to Mashpee, but for many of the other schools I represent, regional school district transportation funding formula, which is not ideal. So we're going to be taking this up this week. Last week we passed a supplemental budget. I was the primary sponsor of an amendment to add an additional $4.5 million in funding to the special education circuit breaker. We had made a commitment in our budget to fund that at up to 75% of what that reimbursement would be. We haven't gotten there yet. We were at 65%. So for Mashpee, a 65% reimbursement from the state means about $417,000. We're really working, and through the supplemental budget we passed, we're hoping to get you a little more money for that. And then in the budget that the Senate's going to release tomorrow, I'm really hopeful and optimistic that we're going to fund 75% of reimbursement, which for Mashpee would mean $481,000. That's significant. We're going to have to fight for that. Hopefully we got to get it in the Senate budget. Then we're going to have to fight for that in conference with the House. But I think in the Senate there's a real commitment to making sure that we're providing adequate funding, taking expert recommendations that we've seen and had, and making sure that there's dollars there. So more to come on that. I'll be sure to hand this out on the foundation budget review. Really what this is, it's unlikely, just from a strategic perspective, it's unlikely that the House and the Speaker are going to take up the bill we're going to take up tomorrow in the Senate. But what this does is it gets the Senate on record about what we feel and what we'd like to do with, one, where we think education support and funding should go. Two, there's several initiatives on the ballot this year, one of which is called, which is going to increase revenue by, it's either called, depending on where you are politically, it's either called the Fair Share Amendment or the Millionaire's Tax. It's having millionaires and billionaires, people with income, who make income over $1 million, pay a higher percentage on their personal income taxes. That's going to generate about an estimated $1.8 billion. What the foundation budget review bill does that we're voting on tomorrow is the Senate's on record saying, hey, voters, if you pass this, we're committing and we want to commit to use this money to fund the Foundation Budget Review Commission recommendations to get school districts more money as it relates to healthcare, as it relates to SPED, as it relates to ELL. So I think it's a big deal that we're on record for this. I wish that, and maybe Dave would have more sort of updates if he was here with us tonight on trying to get this through on the House side. But I think it's important that we really acknowledge the gaps that are there, and there's a path forward for us really to close some of these funding gaps. The other piece I wanted to mention, because this is something that I've just heard across the district and here in Mashpee as well, as we look at health and morbidity and mortality, certainly the opioid epidemic that this region has been dealing with and across the Commonwealth is very much foremost on a lot of our minds. If you look at the public health data and the surveillance data, we are seeing a decrease in opiate overdoses across the state, but we're not seeing that here on the Cape. We're actually seeing a plateau. And Barnstable County has done a really interesting survey and study looking at, all right, what are lessons that we can learn? What are populations that we need to focus on, or groups of people that we need to focus on as it relates to the opioid epidemic? And this is something that I'm a very much big fan of. As you may know, I spent 6 years working at the Department of Public Health for the state prior to this position. So I'm kind of a public health geek, and wanted to share the county to look back, looking at, in a 10-year period from 2004 to 2014, looking at death data. And in Barnstable County, on Cape Cod, there were 281 deaths that were attributed to poisoning by opioids. And looking at, all right, so who is that impacting, right? Of those 281 people, what common threads can we find? What common threads can we see? And what's fascinating, and they looked at employment data and education data. And what really stuck out to me, of those 281 individuals, 65% of them are employed in trades and service industries. The 65% of the county-wide average for being employed in trade and services is 46%, right? So that's a pretty big gap. If you look more granularly, 1 in 4, 25% of those individuals are employed in construction. Then you look at education level, and that of the 281 individuals in this decade period, 69% of the individuals had a high school education or less. So, and if you look at, again, if you look at countywide education, there's only about 31% of us have a high school education or less who live here on Cape Cod, obviously excluding children who are still in school. So really pointing out, right, from a priority population and intervention perspective, it's students who are what we would call straight to work. So not necessarily people who are, if they're graduating, they're not going on to higher education, or if they're not, or they're graduating through a GED or not graduating at all. And it's a straight to work population that's going into services primarily and significantly in construction and trades. And I think this information is helpful, and I've been sharing it with school committees because I think it helps identify from a population-based perspective who potentially are the individuals in our schools and also the people in our communities that we really need to be targeting with interventions both from a prevention perspective and possibly an intervention perspective. And I find that data really compelling. Barnstable County has a pretty thorough report that we can get you access to if you're interested on this. But I thought it was information that was very valuable to share. So those are just some of the things I wanted to talk about tonight. I think if Representative Vieira was here, we'd also be talking about his ongoing commitment to early education, which I very much share, and I very much appreciate Mashpee's efforts. I think you've been a real leader here on Cape Cod, on early ed as well. But glad to just take any questions, and again, thank you for the opportunity to come before you, and I'll be sure to hand these out as well.
Anyone have any questions? Yes, sir.
I just want to thank you, Senator Cyr, for coming and sharing information with us. I also want to point out that I believe Frederick was a Project 351 ambassador in 8th grade.
Thank you.
He does
Quite the track record. Yeah, that's amazing.
And I think, did you attend the Drug Story
Actually,
theater on Friday?
Thank you for reminding me. So I did. I attended the Drug Story theater. I believe it was for the Mashpee Middle School students.
It was for 7th and 8th.
For 7th and 8th.
Yes.
And I don't know if you've heard about this a fascinating program, taking young people who are in recovery themselves, using theatrical arts as therapy, and then crafting stories and essentially a play, but an educational play around primarily drug use, but drug and alcohol use, and also talking about addiction. I found it. I mean, again, I was not the target audience, so I'm a 32-year-old. I'm not a 12 or 14-year-old in that position, but I found it quite effective, and I think that really in having other young people telling their story and sharing that information, I think that fits along with what increasingly we know when it comes to a prevention and an intervention perspective around who are the messengers who are effective. Learning from things that we used to think that may have been effective, but basically sort of like, don't do drugs. Kids sort of from an adult perspective that I think from an evidence perspective we've learned has been not as effective. And really I think the pairing of the personal stories, the individuals who are performing are in recovery themselves. And some of them, I think one of them one was 15, another was 18, another was 21. I mean, so these are people that the middle school, the 7th and 8th graders can really relate to. And so I got an invitation to that and was able to sneak into the back and watch.
Thank you for coming.
But was really impressed by that. And I think if you folks, if there are needs or programs or however we can assist in that as well, I think a lot of the evidence when you're looking at, we're hoping to take up a pretty significant series of opioid legislation in Massachusetts. just really in continuing what we need to do and how to intervene in this. And when you look at particularly the prevention space, a lot of the data and the literature is around, interventions needing to start, or not interventions, rather, prevention programs and education needing to start prior to high school, right, in that middle school age. Some evidence says even you start having these conversations sooner. It was an amazing moment when they actually asked how many students in the audience from 7th and 8th graders know someone who's died of an opioid overdose, and like a third of the room raised their hands. When I was coming up on the Cape, and I'm old, but I'm not. That was not too long ago, right? That would have been pretty unheard of. So it was it was powerful, and I appreciated the opportunity to be there.
Can I thank also Senator Cyr? I'm Hope Hanscom. I'm the assistant superintendent, and I had reached out to Senator Cyr maybe 2 months ago about a student who was in recovery and was an addict, but had also been involved in. She was sort of in the kind of child slave trade as well, and had come out and needed help to get to the recovery high school, because if she wasn't able to attend the recovery high school, it was likely she was going to go back into the servitude. And not only did his staff help me, like dramatically, and help the student, but he reached out to me personally, which I was very grateful for. So when you say anything you need, I just want to know, he really did respond. So I just want to put that out there for our committee and our administrators as well. We're going to reach out.
And I'm going to make sure you all have my cards. And same for Representative Vieira.
He did too, actually.
Yeah.
He gave me a cell phone number like crazy. So,
that's our job.
It was very nice, though, so thank you.
May I ask a question? Well,
Yeah, go ahead.
So I just wanted to say thanks for coming. And I know I speak on behalf of the school committee when I say I hope you'll come back and see us when school's in action, so we can show off all the great things that we're doing here. I was going to mention one thing in particular, and Natana walked in just as I was about to say it. So one of the things that I'm most proud of in the last year is that we've really renewed and committed with the tribe to a really reinvigorated partnership. And we had our first school committee meeting at the tribal headquarters back in October, and we'll be doing that again in June. And to my knowledge, we're the only school committee on the Cape that's doing that, but certainly maybe others should. But one of the things that I'm most proud of is this leadership team that was assembled between the tribe and the school district developed a 10-part professional development series certifying our teachers and people in the schools to getting this professional certification in Wampanoag culture and I don't know the official title. What's the?
It's culture-based education.
Culture-based education. So it's just something I hope that you'll check out, because I think it can really be a model for other districts on the Cape.
I will, and please, when you have opportunities like that, send me an invitation. I can't get to everything, but I really try when there's opportunities like the Drug Story Theater. I think that level of partnership and I think real commitment to meaningful education, especially around collaboration with the tribe, and I think what can be taught about our history, and I think also what can be learned by all students here at Mashpee around social justice, I think is vitally important. And I just thank you for doing that. And if I can ever support and help on either end, I'm glad to.
So, on behalf of, once again, of the entire committee, thank you for coming. Like to see you back soon. There is one thing that I personally would request, and maybe Representative Vieira maybe be addressing that in his meetings. But our school nurses have presented to this committee examples of a really up-and-coming problem besides the opioids is in regard to vaping. And, and in particular, the targeting of young children, 10 years old or less, through creative cartoons and flavors and so forth. And so I'm really hoping that from a legislative perspective, you guys are taking a look at that. And if you're going to raise the age to 21 for tobacco, that's great. but that's not how, they're not going to the store to buy that. And so if you're going to try to address that, you need to put some real teeth into it, I hope. So anyway, thank you again. I appreciate it. Does anyone else have any comments?
I just have one comment. I just want to thank you for your work and efforts into trying to do things for the schools and increase budgets. It's something that we've talked about time and time again here, and I think it's easy with all the work that you have there up at the state level. It's easy to forget about how much of an impact education has on everything. I mean, you spoke a little bit about it with the opioid epidemic. There's always a piece. Education fits into everything that we do, so it's important to make sure that we support that, because it seems like even at the Fed level and the state level, a lot of it gets dropped right on the backs of the local communities, and then we're left trying to figure out how we're going to put everything together.
Yeah, no, I think it's, in my opinion, I think most economists and others would agree, this is the best investment we make in people, and it really pays off. You know, I think to the vaping piece, this is something we're seeing. The bill the House is taking up, which the Senate has been wanting to do this for a while, so the House doing this is good. Includes all tobacco, including vaping. We've got a real problem with the tobacco companies now in the guise of vaping, specifically creating and marketing products that are really are meant to appeal to young people and to minors. And it continues to be a problem. And so it's the problem we had with Joe Camel in the 80s and 90s. You know, we've got that again with, I don't have the products off the top of my head. It's a challenge. I've heard about this from the Department of Public Health as well. I think that I think raising the age to 21 again helps, but the vaping piece is something that is a challenge and needs some persistent attention to over a period of time. It presents a challenge.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming.
So can we get a picture of Frederick with the committee?
Yes.
Okay. So we're going to ask Frederick to come up here with the committee.